The summer air hung heavy over the small town square, every breath thick with dust and heat. The wooden platform creaked as a frail young girl was pushed into the harsh light, her wrists raw from rope, burns her pale blue dress torn at the seams. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, as though the earth might open and swallow her whole. The sheriff's voice boomed across the gathering crowd last lot of the evening. 19 years old, healthy, obedient, starting bid $20. A ripple of unease moved through the people assembled, but no one spoke up. They had all come willingly, some out of curiosity, others out of cruelty, many with silent resignation that this spectacle was now considered normal in Lakewood Valley. Among them stood Elias Turner, a 43-year-old widower whose life had collapsed piece by piece since the death of his wife. He was tall, but weary, his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of grief and debt. Once Elias had owned a modest farm. Now, after years of drought and relentless creditors, he had barely a few coins left. Yet as he watched the girl bruises fading yellow along her arms, a fresh cut on her cheek, something deep inside him stirred. A memory of another woman, another time. His late wife Clara, ridiculed and humiliated by the same townsfolk when illness had taken her strength. None of them had lifted a hand to help her. 25, shouted a voice from the left. It was Lucas Hale, owner of the local tavern, his grin slick with malice. 30, another, chimed in. Caleb Price, a farmer whose drunken rages were the terror of his household. Elias clenched his fists. $30. That was everything I had set aside for seeds. The last chance to salvage my farm. The bidding slowed. Murmurs filled the air thick with expectation. Then Elias heard his own voice cut through the noise, steady and low, but carrying to every ear 50. The square fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned wide with shock, some with laughter, some with fury. For the first time, the girl lifted her gaze. Her eyes gray stormy, filled with a weariness far too old for 19 met his. Her father, standing at the edge of the stage, spat with contempt. "You'll not take my daughter for 70, Elias," interrupted, his jaw tight. He reached into his worn coat and pulled out a small pouch of gold coins, his last inheritance saved from his wife's passing. The sheriff faltered, shifting uncomfortably. "Mr. Turner, this is highly the law, says any free man can bid," Elias answered sharply. "Unless you'd like to explain to the circuit judge why you denied the highest offer." The sheriff swallowed hard, then lifted his gavel. 70 once. 70 twice, sold. The gavel struck wood, and the crowd erupted into whispers, anger, disbelief. A broke widower wasting his last coins. He'll never keep her. Not from us. God help that girl, bought by a man with nothing left. Elias walked forward slowly, heart hammering in his chest. As the girl stepped off the platform, her movements hesitant, he noticed how she flinched each time her parents looked at her. She was trembling not from him, but from the expectation that the cruelty would only continue. He stopped a respectful distance away. "What is your name?" Her lips barely moved. "Anna." For a moment, silence stretched between them. In her eyes, Elias saw not only fear, but the faintest spark of something else, defiance, or maybe survival. He bent his head slightly and whispered, so only she could hear, "You're safe now. I swear it." The promise was thin, fragile against the roaring hostility around them. Yet in that instant, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and shadows swallowed the square, Elias knew this desperate act had already set into motion something no one in Lakewood Valley could stop. And then the truth began to surface. Long before the square filled with whispers of outrage, Elias Turner had lived a very different life. His farm on the edge of Lakewood Valley had once been a place of promise, fields of golden wheat swaying under the summer sun, a modest barn filled with the smell of hay and laughter echoing from the small wooden house where he and his wife Clara built their dreams. Clara had been his strength, gentle in her words, fierce in her convictions. She used to say the worth of a man isn't counted in coins, Elias, but in how he treats those who have less than him. But when pneumonia struck during the bitter winter 2 years ago, the townsfolk turned their backs. The doctor refused to come too far, too dangerous, too poor a patient. Elias had begged, offered every cent he had, but Clara died wrapped in his arms before the fire, leaving him with nothing but silence and a hollow ache that refused to fade. The drought came the following spring, relentless, merciless. His fields withered, his savings vanished, and creditors circled like vultures. By the time the auction was announced, Elias had only a handful of gold coins left, coins he had meant to use to plant seed for one last chance at survival. Now he had spent it all on a girl he had never met. Anna Collins, on the other hand, had never known kindness from those who should have loved her. Her parents, beaten down by poverty and bitterness, had turned their resentment toward their only child. To them, Anna was a burden, a mouth to feed, a reminder of mistakes and broken dreams. She learned early that silence was safer than words. Every bruise had taught her to keep her head bowed, every harsh word had carved away at her hope. By 19, she had stopped believing in rescue. And yet she had a secret. In the quiet hours of night when the house fell into uneasy slumber, Anna would sneak into her father's study. There, hidden beneath ledgers of unpaid debts and letters sealed with the mayor's crest, she had found things: whispers of land deals, false records, names written in ink that smelled of betrayal. She had seen enough to understand that her family was not simply poor, but part of something darker. One night, she had stolen a key from her father's desk, tucking it into her shoe. She didn't know exactly what it opened, only that it locked away a red book he guarded more jealously than his own soul. That secret weighed on her, heavier than any chain. When Elias had called out that bid, 70, Anna hadn't looked up at first. She had braced for the jeers, for the cruelty she knew so well. But then his voice reached her again, softer, promising safety. Something inside her, long buried, stirred. As they left the square together, the crowd's hostility pressed in on all sides. Spittle hit the ground at Elias's boots. Laughter and curses chased them down the street. Anna kept her steps small, measured, as though expecting at any moment to be yanked back. At the edge of town, Elias helped her onto his battered wagon. The old horse snorted, impatient. The sun was sinking now, painting the sky in streaks of red and gold, and the air felt thick with the unspoken, "What now?" Elias gripped the reins, but didn't start right away. He looked at her, really looked at her. The torn dress, the bruises, the haunted eyes. She looked like a shadow of someone who had been taught all her life that she was worth nothing. But Elias had once heard the same lies whispered about himself and Clara. He had buried one love already. Perhaps, just perhaps, this reckless act wasn't madness at all. Perhaps it was the only way to honor Clara's memory. "I won't hurt you," he said at last. "You're free here." Anna didn't answer. Her hands tightened in her lap, and her gaze turned toward the horizon where the dark outline of the forest loomed. She had been told too many lies to believe in promises. Still, for the first time in years, she allowed herself a thought she had nearly forgotten. What if he was telling the truth? The wagon wheels groaned over the dry earth as Elias steered away from town. The sky had dimmed into a bruised purple, and the cicadas screamed from the fields like a warning chorus. Anna sat stiffly beside him, her eyes darting to every shadow, every figure lingering on the roadside. When they passed Lucas Hale's tavern, a voice rang out sharp and mocking. $70 for something you can't keep. Turner laughter spilled from the doorway. Men slapping each other's shoulders, their eyes burning with both hatred and amusement. Anna flinched, her body curling inward as if bracing for a blow. Elias said nothing, his jaw set, but the heat of their stares clung to his back all the way out of town. By the time they reached his farmhouse, a lonely cabin hunched against the edge of a withered field, the sun had sunk completely. The lantern Elias lit inside cast long shadows against the wall, shadows that seemed to magnify Anna's unease. "This was my son's room," Elias said quietly, opening the door to a small space with a narrow bed and a window that faced the forest. "It locks from the inside. No one will bother you here." The words sounded strange in her ears. "No one will bother you." She almost laughed bitterly. Freedom had never been hers to imagine. Still, when she saw the simple wooden bolt on the door, something in her chest loosened. That night, Elias sat at the kitchen table staring at Clara's old gold locket resting in his palm. He had spent everything for a girl he didn't know, a girl who looked at him with the same mistrust he once saw in the faces of townsfolk who wished him gone. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. He could almost hear Clara's voice. "Do what's right, even when it costs you everything." Anna didn't sleep. She lay rigid on the bed, every creak of the house setting her nerves on fire. The bruises on her arms ached, but it wasn't the pain that kept her awake. It was the question clawing inside her. Why did he do it? Why throw away his last coins on me? Near midnight, she rose silently and crept into the main room. By the dim glow of the dying fire, she scanned the shelves. Rows of books lined the wall, federal law manuals, histories, even letters tied neatly with twine. She touched one, her fingers brushing notes scribbled in the margins. Whoever Elias Turner was, he was no ordinary farmer. Her thoughts were interrupted by the distant thunder of hooves. She darted to the window, heart pounding. 3 men on horseback rode along the fence-lined lanterns, swaying in the dark. Even through the glass, she recognized them. Lucas Hale, Caleb Price, and a third man, Mr. Harper, the town's attorney known for twisting laws like knives. Their voices carried in the still night. "Won't be long before he slips. Man's broke. We'll see how long he holds on to her." Anna's stomach turned. They weren't just mocking Elias. They were planning, watching, waiting. The next morning, Elias returned from the well with a bucket of water. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands raw from labor. He found Anna already awake, her eyes dark from sleeplessness. "They were here last night," she blurted out before she could stop herself. "Hale, Price, Harper." They circled the farm. Elias set down the bucket calmly, but his eyes hardened. "They want this land, always have, and now they'll use you to justify taking it." Anna frowned. "Why, the soil's dry. The crops are gone." Elias hesitated, then answered. "Because this land touches the river, and word is the railroad's coming through." Anna's breath caught. The railroad, she had overheard her father mention it too in hushed tones with the mayor. That red book he guarded, the one locked away in his desk, had been filled with maps and payments. Suddenly, pieces began to click into place. She studied Elias. He was no fool, no desperate drunk clutching his last pennies. He had bought her knowing she carried secrets that could destroy powerful men. "You knew," she whispered, voice trembling. "You knew who I was before that auction." Elias met her gaze steadily. "I knew enough. The rest you'll have to decide whether to trust me with." For the first time in years, Anna felt something she barely recognized, choice, but outside the storm was gathering. By evening, townsfolk were already whispering about the widower who dared to buy a girl. Children had been told not to walk near his property. Women clutched their shawls tighter when his name was spoken. And in the tavern, Lucas Hale raised his glass high. Tomorrow, he promised his friends, will remind Turner and that girl that nothing stays hidden in this town. Anna stood at the window of the cabin, watching the lanterns flicker in the distance. Her fingers pressed against the small key hidden in her shoe. She knew what it unlocked. She knew what it meant. The only question was whether she had the courage to reveal it. The storm broke at dawn not with rain, but with tension. The air in Lakewood Valley was thick-charged, as though the earth itself knew something was about to shift. Elias rose early, stepping outside to inspect the field, while Anna lingered in the doorway, her arms crossed tight against her chest. All night she had debated with herself. The key in her shoe pressed against her skin like a brand, reminding her of what she carried. For years she had been silent, swallowing her father's orders, his lies, his rage. But silence had bought her nothing but scars. Now in this cabin that smelled faintly of cedar and lamp oil, she stood on the edge of a choice. By mid-morning, a wagon approached. Dust swirled around its wheels, and a familiar figure climbed down Grace Wilkins, the town's midwife, a broad-shouldered woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through a soul. She carried a basket of food and a bundle of papers. "Brought you supplies," she told Elias, her gaze flicking briefly toward Anna. "And news. The new county judge arrived yesterday. Davis. He's already inspecting land records." Elias's jaw tightened. "Looking for any excuse to seize property," Grace replied, "particularly land owned by widowers and immigrants, especially land near the river." Anna's breath caught. The river, the railroad, father's book. The pieces fit too neatly. She lowered her gaze, afraid her thoughts might show on her face. Grace set the basket on the table and leaned close to Elias. "Be careful. They want you off this land. You and anyone who dares to stand with you." That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Elias found Anna sitting on the porch, her eyes distant. She was clutching something in her hand, turning it over again and again. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Her fingers unfurled, revealing the small, ornate key, its brass glinting in the last light. Elias recognized it immediately, not as an object, but as a symbol. Secrets lived behind locks, and secrets were the most dangerous currency in Lakewood Valley. "My father keeps a red ledger," Anna whispered. "Locked in his desk. I've seen the cover. I've seen him write in it after meetings with the mayor. Payments, land deeds, names. I don't know everything inside, but I know enough it isn't honest." Elias leaned against the railing, the weight of her words settling deep. "That's why he sold you." Anna blinked. "What? Because you knew too much," Elias said. "Because you saw what he was doing. Men like your father would rather sell their own blood than risk being exposed." The truth hit her harder than any blow. She had always wondered why the disdain in her parents' eyes had turned to outright hatred. Now she understood it wasn't just poverty or bitterness. It was fear. Fear of what she knew, fear that she might one day speak. Her voice trembled. "If I give you that key, you'll have proof. But if they find out I told you, they already want me ruined," Elias interrupted. "The difference is whether we fight back or not." That night, as the cabin settled into silence, Anna dreamed of fire. Of the platform where she had been sold, the crowd's jeers, the weight of her father's hand pressing her down. But woven into the nightmare was something new, Elias's voice steady, unyielding. "You're safe now. You're free here." She woke with a start, her palms sweating around the key she hadn't let go of. For the first time in years, she didn't feel powerless. She felt dangerous. The following day, as they sat down to a sparse breakfast, the sound of hooves shattered the morning calm. 3 horsemen rode up, their figures stark against the pale sky. Lucas Hale and Caleb Price dismounted with arrogant ease, while a tall man in a tailored coat remained on horseback. "Mr. Turner," the stranger said smoothly. "Judge Davis. I'm conducting property inspections on behalf of the county." Elias rose slowly, his face unreadable. "My taxes are paid." "This isn't about taxes," Davis replied. "It's about suitability. Land must be used productively. Your fields are barren." Anna's chest tightened. She could almost hear her father's voice in the judge's tone. This wasn't law. This was theft wrapped in official language. Elias crossed his arms. "This land is mine, recorded and deeded since 1869, with the proper papers." Davis's smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned cold. Times change. Laws change. You do well to remember that. Lucas spat on the ground. "Don't worry, Judge. Turner won't hold out long, especially with the company he's keeping." His gaze slid to Anna, lingering oily. Elias stepped forward, his presence enough to make Lucas shift back a fraction. "You've overstayed your welcome." For a moment the air trembled with the possibility of violence. Then Davis tipped his hat, his voice silk over steel. "We'll be back, Mr. Turner. And next time we'll settle this permanently." When the riders left, silence descended heavy on the cabin. Anna's hands shook as she clutched the key tighter. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Not until they have your land. Not until they silence me." Elias met her eyes, calm but fierce. "Then it's time we show them what truth looks like." For the first time, Anna nodded, not as a victim, but as someone ready to fight. And the first lock they would break open would be her father's. The town square of Lakewood Valley had never been so crowded. By late afternoon, word had spread like wildfire. Judge Davis was holding a public meeting at Lucas Hale's Tavern, joined by Mayor Marshall himself. Farmers, merchants, and curious townsfolk packed shoulder to shoulder, their voices a low hum of anticipation. At the back of the crowd stood Elias Turner. His worn coat buttoned, his face set like stone. Beside him, Anna's fingers curled around the small key in her pocket. She felt the weight of it burning against her skin, as though daring her to act. Inside the tavern, Davis raised his glass. "Friends, Lakewood Valley deserves prosperity. But prosperity requires sacrifice. Certain lands lying fallow must be reassigned for the good of the community. We cannot allow one man's failures to hold back progress." Laughter rippled through the room. All eyes flicked to Elias. Lucas Hale leaned against the bar, his grin spreading wide. "You hear that, Turner? They're finally going to put your dirt to better use. Maybe they'll even build the railroad straight through your cabin." The crowd chuckled. Some nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably, as though sensing something unjust, but too fearful to speak. Anna's pulse thundered in her ears. She had lived her whole life watching men like this, her father Lucas, the mayor, twist words into chains. But now she wasn't on the stage as a victim. She was in the crowd, a witness holding the very piece of metal that could unravel them. Before she realized what she was doing, she stepped forward. "Wait." The word cut through the noise like a blade. Heads turned. Murmurs rose. The sight of her bruised thin, the girl's soul just days ago, silenced the laughter. Anna lifted her chin, her voice trembling but clear. "You talk about progress, about the good of the community. But tell me, Judge Davis, how much did my father pay you to steal land that was never yours?" Gasps shot through the room. Davis's face drained of color before flushing red. "You insolent," Elias's voice boomed, steady and deep. "Answer her." The sheriff shifted uneasily by the door. Mayor Marshall barked, "This is slander. That girl's been corrupted by Turner." Anna's hand shot into her pocket. She held the ornate key high for all to see. "This opens my father's desk. Inside, there's a red book pages filled with payments forged, deeds maps, showing the railroad diverted across stolen land. I saw it with my own eyes." The square erupted in shouts. Some demanded proof, others jeered, dismissing her as a liar. But through the chaos, one man stood, Reverend Thornton, the town's preacher. "If she speaks truth, then let the truth be revealed," he declared, his voice ringing like a bell. "No man, no judge, no mayor is above the law of God or country." Elias seized the moment. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet, the copy of a letter from Boston sent by Professor Benson confirming legal irregularities tied to the land. He held it high. "We have witnesses. We have records. You wanted a public meeting? Well, here it is. Let everyone see who profits while the rest of you starve." Davis lunged forward, but the sheriff blocked him, hand on his holster. The tension snapped like a whip. "You've gone too far." Turner Marshall spat, his face twisted with fury. "You think you can shame me in front of my town?" Anna's voice rose above the clamor, clear and defiant. "You shamed yourself the day you let my parents sell me like cattle. And you shamed this town every time you turned its people into property." The crowd shifted. Whispers turned to anger, not at Anna, but at the men on the stage. A farmer shouted, "She's right," another voice added, "If he has the book, let's see it." Suddenly Lucas Hale's grin faltered. The tide was turning. Elias stepped beside Anna, his broad frame shielding her from the hostile glares. "Every man and woman here deserves dignity," he said, his voice carrying over the restless crowd. "Not one of us is for sale. Not one of us should be stripped of what we've built so a few can grow richer." For a heartbeat, the square held its breath. Then the dam broke. Shouts rose, demanding justice. Fists pounded tables. People surged forward. The sheriff raised his hand, struggling to control the chaos. Davis stumbled back, sweat beading his forehead. Marshall barked orders that no one heeded. Anna felt her knees tremble, but Elias's steady presence anchored her. Together they had ripped a crack in the wall of silence that had ruled Lakewood Valley for years. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, the truth was no longer locked in her father's desk. It was spilling into the streets, unstoppable. And what came next would shatter the town beyond repair. The tavern shook with noise. Shouts, curses, fists slamming against tables. The fragile order of Lakewood Valley was unraveling before everyone's eyes. Judge Davis barked for silence, but no one obeyed. Mayor Marshall's face glistened with sweat as he struggled to regain control, while Lucas Hale pressed against the wall, suddenly less confident without the crowd at his back. And then a new sound cut through the chaos. The church bell, slow, deliberate tolls echoing across the square. People turned instinctively, drifting outside as the heavy iron rang again and again. At the steps of the church, Reverend Thornton stood with a bundle of papers in his hands. He held them high, his voice carrying with the authority of Scripture. "These," he cried, "are copies of the Red Ledger, records of bribes, land theft, forged deeds delivered into my care by those who will no longer be silent." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The papers were passed from hand to hand, eyes widening as the names leapt from the ink. Marshall, Davis, Hale, and at the center, John Collins, Anna's father. Anna froze, her blood running cold. She had known. Deep down, she had always known. But seeing her father's name there entwined with corruption twisted her stomach. A voice roared from the back, cracked and furious. "Lies!" Her father shoved his way forward, his face red with rage. The crowd parted reluctantly, leaving him standing before his daughter, fists trembling. "You dare shame me," he snarled. "You traitorous child. After everything I've done to keep food on your table, you sold me." Anna cut in, her voice firm. For the first time, she did not lower her eyes. "You sold your own daughter for coins, like a piece of furniture you no longer wanted." The crowd gasped again. Even the ones who had whispered against Elias now shifted uneasily, their gazes darting between father and daughter. Colin's lip curled, spittle flying as he shouted, "You were never worth the trouble. Your mother saw it. That's why she left. You were a curse the day you were born." The words struck like daggers, but Anna did not flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice trembling yet strong enough for all to hear. "No. She left because she couldn't bear you. Because you chose greed over love. Because you chained this town with lies and thought no one would break free. But I did, and so will they." Her father's arm jerked up, ready to strike. For a heartbeat, the crowd froze. Then a hand clamped around his wrist. Elias. His grip was iron, his gaze steady. "Enough." His voice rumbled like thunder. "Every person here is worth the same. You cannot sell dignity. You cannot sell blood." Collins wrenched against him, but the sheriff stepped forward at last, pulling out a set of irons. "John Collins, you'll come with me. We've had enough of your kind." "No, you can't do this to me." Collins roared, thrashing as the shackles snapped shut. "This town belongs to me." "Belonged," Reverend Thornton corrected, his voice ringing above the din. "From this day, Lakewood Valley belongs to the truth." The crowd surged with noise, cheers, demands for justice, disbelief, giving way to something brighter. For the first time, they weren't looking at Elias with suspicion or at Anna with scorn. They were looking at them with respect. Anna stood trembling in the center of it, all the key still clutched in her hand. The same key her father had guarded like a crown had now become the symbol of his undoing. She looked at Elias. His steady nod was the anchor she needed. She breathed deeply and whispered almost to herself, "It's over." But she knew it wasn't just the end of her father's power. It was the end of who she had been, silent, afraid, invisible. That girl was gone. What remained was a woman who had spoken and been heard. And nothing in Lakewood Valley would ever be the same again. 6 months later, Lakewood Valley no longer looked like the same town. The drought still lingered, the earth still cracked beneath the relentless sun. But something deeper had shifted, something inside the people. Where once whispers of fear and prejudice ruled, now there were conversations in the open. The railroad, once a scheme whispered between crooked officials, had arrived for real. Its shining tracks cut across the valley, and the brand new station stood proudly on the edge of Elias Turner's land. Not stolen, not sold. His. The cabin that had once seemed lonely and fragile was now filled with voices. Children gathered beneath the old oak tree, sitting cross-legged as Anna Turner, no longer Collins, no longer the girl who bowed her head, taught them to read and write. Her voice carried with quiet determination, her back straight, her eyes alight with purpose. Black-white immigrant children, who once would never have sat together, now shared the same wooden benches Elias had built by hand. What began as a lesson for 3 orphans had grown into a school, a place where futures were being rewritten one letter at a time. Elias, hammer in hand, watched from the porch as Anna guided a small boy through the alphabet. Pride swelled in his chest, not for himself, but for her. She had been broken-souled, cast aside, and yet here she stood, teaching others how to lift their voices. "Never thought I'd be a teacher," Anna admitted one afternoon, wiping chalk dust from her fingers as the children ran off laughing. For years I thought my voice didn't matter, that no one would ever listen. Elias smiled, the lines on his face softening. They listen now, and they always will. The old powers had fallen hard. Mayor Marshall was convicted of fraud and sent to prison. Judge Davis fled in the night, captured weeks later under a false name in Chicago. Lucas Hale lost his tavern to creditors, his laughter silenced by ruin. And John Collins, Anna's father, was left a broken man. Shackled not only by law, but by shame, he became a shadow on the streets, avoided by those who once obeyed him. Anna saw him once hunched outside the blacksmith's, muttering to himself. For the briefest moment, the girl inside her ached. But then she remembered the platform, the crowd, the gavel. She turned away, not with hatred, but with something colder, indifference. On the morning the first train officially rolled into Lakewood Valley, the town gathered at the station. The whistle echoed like a herald of a new age. Men tipped their hats, women clasped their children's hands, and for once no one looked away from Elias or Anna. Instead, they looked toward them. An elderly woman pressed close to Anna and whispered, "My boy has a job here now." They would never have taken him before. Her son, his leg twisted from birth, stood proudly in a railroad uniform, waving with both hands. Anna smiled, tears pricking her eyes. It wasn't just us. It was all of us who chose truth over silence. Elias placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. That's justice. Not just punishing the guilty, but building something better. That evening, the sun dipped low, painting the valley in gold. Elias and Anna walked back toward the cabin, the station's towers glowing against the horizon. When I was on that platform, Anna whispered all I wanted was revenge. I wanted them all to suffer. Elias nodded. And now I understand, she said softly, that real freedom isn't breaking chains. It's building a table where everyone can sit. They paused at the porch, the lamp inside flickering to life. A single candle burned on the windowsill, its flame steady against the gathering dark. Anna gazed at it, remembering the nights when she had thought herself nothing more than a shadow. They tried to sell me, she murmured, her voice strong. But my worth was never theirs to decide. Elias looked at her, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. And now the whole town knows it. Together, they stepped inside, leaving the candle to glow against the night, a symbol of dignity that could not be bought, a reminder that even the smallest flame can light a revolution.